Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga gave a detailed proposal of the amended calendar for the 2020 academic year in a briefing on the sector on Thursday. This as the country moves to level 4 of the coronavirus. The sector is expected to make numerous adjustments to ensure the safety of children without exposing them to the coronavirus. To look at whether the department has in place a continuation of a learning action plan that doesn't necessarily depend on schools physically reopening, we're now joined via Skype by Idea Digital Education CEO Dr. Corrin Varady. Dr. Varady, thank you so very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
As a start, we've heard the minister talking about the fact that, schools will reopen gradually. While we're sort of in the midst of this pandemic, a lot of parents panicking and saying, listen, I'm not taking my child back to school to face any kind of, what might be a bad situation. Do you think that, we have this government who talks about, going digital, talking about making sure that learners are able to do things online? Are we wasting a sort of opportunity where we could be phasing in more of that than allowing children to sit in a classroom while we're right in the middle of this dangerous pandemic?
I think a big takeaway from the minister's announcement last week was really that they're prioritising the welfare of students and teachers. And I think if we look at our neighbours, for example, Namibia or Rwanda, they're looking at an August-September return date for schools. So I think the one thing that we're sure about at the moment is that we're not sure when schools are going to go back, even if we have a provisional plan for the 1st of June. That means that we have an urgency on two counts. One is that we have an urgency to look at how do we make sure that we continuously provide education to students during a lockdown, but also it's about how do we now look at when the students do return and we transition back to school, how do we make sure that we can help to remediate or help them to catch up? And I think that's where technology really needs to fit in. So I think there's an urgency, there's definitely momentum around providing that. Whether or not we're actually prepared is another story. And I don't think that we're fully prepared to understand what does technology in the education sector look like. We've been believing that fourth industrial revolution buzzwords and all of these concepts that have been pushing us for the last couple of years haven't been really urgent. I think what this pandemic is doing for us right now is insinuating that we must move urgently to ensure that our students have continuous learning and an ability to catch up at the end.
And of course, it's very difficult when we talk about, the fourth industrial revolution because, when we talk about technology and moving forward, we are in a way excluding a large number of our country, of our society who may not have, access to, even personal computers or internet access at home or unlimited Wi-Fi at home. Are we not then, when we have these conversations, are we not excluding a large part of our society and maybe even creating a sort of bigger gap in terms of where we're going with our society?
So I think that if we were discussing device penetration in terms of how much have we saturated the market with a basic technology device, we have a high majority of our population who has been covered. I think the one thing this has done is really open interesting dialogues around data, because I think both from a government point of view and a private sector, we have to be looking at how does data actually impact on digital education. Yeah. The challenge is that if we keep saying that it's just about infrastructure and hardware that are the obstacles for us to provide a better education, we're sort of relegating ourselves to only using radio or broadcast or print as a means to delivering to our students. And the honest truth is we can't monitor or evaluate how much is a student actually learning from that, what are they getting from it, what's the progress, and are we providing any feedback? So we do need to have some harder conversations around technology technology and the democracy of technology. But, it's not just simply about whether students have access to a device or not. Yeah. We really need to be having harder conversations around what does data look like in a modern era where South Africa may actually be one of the most expensive and constrained countries on this continent in terms of data access.
Yeah, I know it's not the conversation you want to only have, but it is important. Let's just imagine a best case scenario where all South Africans and learners and parents alike have access to internet connectivity, devices and resources at a time of crisis. Where would that then leave integral stakeholders in schools? For example, your teachers, your principals, so forth. What does that then mean for them? With fourth industrial revolution in education, do they still then, would they have a prominent role then still, or does that then, as people have been saying all along, does that then cancel certain professions?
Sure, I think there's been a lot of fear around what does artificial intelligence and fourth industrial revolution look like in terms of industries. But in the education sector, there is no doubt. A teacher makes all the difference in terms of the life of a child and their student performance. So I don't think that there's any question. There's certainly no question that technology does not replace a teacher or a school. What we need to be looking at is that there is going to be what we call a new normal in the education sector. There's going to be a transformed role of what the teacher is doing in the classroom or in the lives of their students. And I think this whole remote learning environment has been a perfect example of it. So what we've been seeing is a lot of policy coming from institutions to tell teachers to transform completely towards a digital platform, cloud-based delivery of education. The challenge is that we expect teachers to do that overnight. We have not supported, nor do we support the expectation or the professional development of those teachers. So I think it's really important that actually the new step is not about fearing that teachers will be replaced, but actually how do we reach out and say, what would you like in terms of support? What does a digital remote program look like for you? So that if we get rid of all these infrastructure and hardware challenges, we actually know we've got these fantastic facilitators of learning really more prepared to take on what a new normal or a technology-enriched environment looks like. But at the moment, we're focusing on how do we just get some basic resources to students and not talking about what do teachers need from us to be able to better support them.
I mean, Dr. Varady, what is the lesson here? I mean, we obviously don't wish to be faced with another pandemic of this sort. What lessons are we learning out of this? And should our children get used to remote learning? I know, for instance, my child just wants to see his friends at school. This is not necessarily something he's particularly enjoying very much. Should we get to a point where we just kind of go, well, tough, get used to it?
So I think that we've got to maybe evaluate what was happening prior to the pandemic having broken out. And that was that we were moving to a more personalised, technology-enriched environment. It doesn't remove sport. It doesn't remove socio-effective activities. It doesn't remove extra or co-curricular activities. But it does show us that there is an urgency around how do we even the playing field for some students so that we're providing them with an education no matter what. Because whilst we're having a discussion at the moment around the influence of a pandemic, we've had for a long time disequalizing obstacles that have been in the way, whether it's socioeconomic, and in other countries, war and politics have been the key problems. So the one thing that it's showing us is that technology can help us to bridge that, can be a non-prejudiced means of us actually delivering an education. What we need to start doing from a lesson point of view is that we should have moved earlier, and we should be experimenting right now about what does work, and not only looking at the obstacles that may prevent us over the next 6 to 9 months of delivering a child's education.
And just in closing, I mean, I'm just going to ask you sort of subjectively, really, if you look, what is the Department of Basic Education actually missing at this time? What is key that they're missing? I mean, you talk about the fact that we could have perhaps moved with this earlier, but as you sit, what are some of the, and I think this is the word I'm going to use, what are some of the mistakes that perhaps you might be picking up?
So I think the department, as I go back to, I think is really focused on the health and welfare of our students and preparing schools. And I think that takes up a lot of the time and investment. We certainly do have basic frameworks around what curriculum recovery may look like. I think that that's where we need to also be focusing some of our attention, is what does it really mean the day that the schools do reopen, and not just simply from an operational or welfare point of view, but what does an education program look like for the rest of this year and into next year. I think a little bit more focus around how do we provide, using technology, which is present in a lot of our schools across the country, how do we make sure that that's going to help us to meet curriculum recovery goals? But I do think that the department will have to move into that space. There's no doubt, though, that the priority right at the moment is around when will the schools return and what does that look like from a pure operational point of view. We as in private sector are really there to support government in terms of what does it look like at that next step? How do we drive educational outcomes once the students do return?
All right. Thank you so very much for your valuable input there. Thanks for giving us your time. That's Dr. Corrin Varady, of course, talking to us about, education now in terms of remote learning and what more we can do as a country when it comes to education of our learners.